because we didn't paint a miniature in episode 1, I think it's time we did that. And so in this video I'm going to show you from start to finish my personal way of building, planning and painting the miniature. To do this we're going to be using the recently released Fantasy Flight Games Star Wars Legion Lando Calrissian model. So join me on this journey. The very first thing you're going to want to do is inspect the contents of the miniature that you've purchased. With a Star Wars Legion miniature, they come with cards and tokens, so naturally you're going to want to check to see if you've got all of those in your box. But not only that, the older Legion models don't come on sprues. In this case this one does, but the older models don't. They all come unassembled and all the parts are loose, and in some very rare instances you can find some parts to be missing, or you'll have duplicates of parts, and you're going to want to get that resolved as quickly as possible with the retailer that you've purchased your model from. So it's always good to inspect all this stuff just to make sure you've got it all there. It also gives you a chance to peruse your item, look at your instructions and get a feel of the model that you're going to be working on. In this instance this model comes with quite a few different build options, and that could possibly influence how you're going to paint it and how you're going to build it, of which conveniently brings me on to. So these are all the tools that I typically use to assemble a miniature. I'm unsure if I'll use all of them in the video. Hopefully I'll be able to demonstrate each of their purposes. First up we have the snippers, the clippers, which we'll be using to cut the parts off the sprue. Next up the Tamiya extra thin cement, of which is perfect for this particular model. Other Legion models, again particularly the older ones, will require you to use something a bit stronger. I use Gorilla Glue in that instance. Just don't get it in your hair. Bad idea. Different plastics and materials indeed do require different sorts of glue. Next up, it's always handy to have a bit of blue tack on hand. It's sometimes helpful to use this just to pre-test some parts. Also helps aid picking up smaller parts as well. A X-Acto knife, of which is perfect for cleaning up flash and mould lines, just to give a nicer surface to work on your model. Next up, some tweezers is always helpful to pick up smaller parts and just help you reposition things and retouch. And then finally, this little tool, I can't remember the actual name for it. It has a really sticky end on one end and a somewhat sticky end on the other. This kind of acts almost like blue tack as well, in that it's great for picking up smaller parts. Although looking at mine, both ends on these have dried up slightly and aren't as tacky as when I first bought them. So looking over the instructions and the parts, I think I'm going to go for this option. And well, let's get building. Before you touch your model or miniature with paint, you're going to want to prime it first. This allows the paint to bond onto the miniature much easier, and also the choice in colour of primer that you use can also start off as a great foundation colour that you can build up or work from. In this instance I'm using Wraith Bone. Starting off with a lighter colour in primer can certainly make it easier to lighten or darken your colours. To prime you're going to want to shake your can for the duration that it tells you to on the instructions. Ideally you want to be in a well ventilated area, typically outside. Make sure the condition's right for it, and it's not near anywhere that you're going to get the spray paint onto other than the miniature itself. I typically use a cardboard box, and while from spraying left to right in short bursts allows me to get the coverage that I need on my miniature. Do this for a couple of passes. Also allow each layer to dry before touching or turning your miniature around to work on the next side. You don't want to spray directly onto the miniature as this will clog up your detailing. Lando is the perfect example for a miniature that has a lot of options, not only in its build but in terms of what you can do with the paint scheme. From his Solo A Star Wars Story look to his original trilogy look, you can be as daring or as safe as you want in terms of paint schemes. I'm going to play it safe and I'm going to do his costume from Return of the Jedi, and so I'm going to try and closely match the colours that fit this outfit. He's just assisted in blowing up the second Death Star, and now he's ready to bring the fight on the ground on Endor, and his grassy green base is going to reflect that, of which I've based my other Rebel troopers with. To do this, I'm using Sterling Mud and then paint over with Elysian Green, then dry brushing with Baylor Brown. For the skin tones, I'm going to use Mornfam Brown. For the shirt, I'm going to use Baylor Brown. For the trousers, Fenrisian Grey. For the boots, hair and belt, Abaddon Black. And then for the sleeves of the shirt, I'm undecided between Ironarch Skin and Xandri Dust. For the rank badge, I'm going to use Mechanica Standard Grey. For the cape, reference material is quite varied in terms of what colour tone it actually is. Some pictures show it to be quite grey, others show it to be quite a light blue, and so some creative licence can probably be taken. So I'm going to use the Fang, and then for shading over the figure, I'll probably be using Agrax Earth Shade, and possibly Nuln Oil over the blaster. Then for the chain and any silver detailing, Lead Belcher. To paint the miniature, I'm going to be using these tools, starting off with a pot of water. This is going to help me thin down my paints and clean my brush as well. Likewise, I'm going to use some toilet roll, or you can use kitchen roll to do this. It's also great for getting excess paint off if you do dry brushing as well. I've got a small detail brush, a larger brush, and then a dry brush. A painting handle, although you can use a cork bottle stopper with a bit of blue tack and you can stick your miniature onto that. That also works as a great way for holding your miniature. And last up, we've got my brush case, of which I use to thin and test my paints before applying them onto the miniature. I know a lot of people use a wet palette. One day I might invest or make one, but that's just how I paint, that's how I do me. So without further ado, let's just crack on. To start off, we're going to paint the skin, of which I'm using Mornfam Brown for. To thin your paints, you take a small dab of your paint, apply it onto your palette, and then get a small bit of water to an almost 1:1 ratio and just mix it in. What you're looking for is quite a thin consistency, not too thin, just almost that of milk. And then we're just going to start painting in the features onto the miniature. Once this is dried, we'll then apply a second coat. I'm going to do this with all the paints, but I'm probably not going to show it on camera. It's always recommended to use 2 thin coats just to get the better finish. And naturally, when you're done with each colour, give your brush a little wash and a nice dry on your paper towel. Yeah, I don't know why I'm using a small brush for that. So let's change gears with this big brush. To make the inside of the cape a bit darker, I'm going to add a bit of Abaddon Black to the Fang. As you can see, because I use such a big brush for the inside of the cape, I've managed to get it a little bit on his trousers, but that's not a biggie. It's paint at the end of the day. We can clean that up. The sleeves of the shirt I was split between Ironarch Skin and Xandri Dust. I think I'm going to go for Ironarch Skin just because it looks a little more cream than the other. For paints like Lead Belcher, Iron Warriors, anything that has a kind of metal tinge to it, after using these and cleaning your brush in the water, it's probably worth changing your water at this point, just because you can get metal flecks which can transfer into your other paints that you're going to use. So empty your water out, rinse your water pot and fill it up again with fresh water. For the shading, I'm going to use Agrax Earthshade. You don't need to water this paint down, but the most important thing about this paint is you're going to want to shake it up first to activate the paint, as you can get a bit of a glossy finish with this if you don't. The reason why you don't really need to water this down is because it's already a watery consistency and is designed to get into the recesses of your miniature. This paint's a bit of a cheat as to how you can get shadows and ultimately more points of interest. It does take some time to work it. You can always easily re-clean up with the previous paints you've used just to get the colour in certain spots back. For the base of the miniature, we're going to use some texture paint, and we're going to use a tool that I didn't actually show you in my tools section, but it's this Citadel texture paint spreader. Texture paint is quite thick and lumpy, and this tool is designed to just, well, spread the paint onto the base. It's got a big, thicker side for larger areas and a smaller side just to get them smaller nooks and crannies. If you are going to apply this and you've only got a brush to hand, make sure it's an older brush and basically one that you're happy to ruin, just because this paint does set lumpy and thick and give you, as it says on the tin, texture. And then once I've done this, I'm going to let it set.
1 hour later.
So now that it's set, we can apply some Elysian green to give it that nice grassy green look. Switch into a smaller brush just to get around the boots. And now we're going to go with some dry brushing on Baylor Brown. Dry brushing is a case of just dunking your dry brush into paint and working all the paint into those bristles, getting rid of any excess and having little amount of paint on the brush. And you just start lightly brushing onto the texture part of the base or where you're going to be working. Finally, to quote unquote finish off the miniature, I'm going to paint the rim of the base in a Baden black. And well, that's the miniature done. For now, I might decide to do a bit more on it, but there's nothing to stop me from building up those layers and adding a few more details. But as it stands, it's tabletop ready and I'm pretty happy with it.